So how should we start? Okay then, so
Good afternoon.
good afternoon. Hello there, I'm Peter Batt, and today I'm talking to
Niema Ash.
Niema Ash, authoress extraordinaire.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad you said that.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you have produced an unusual array of books. I mean, your previously most famous was Connecting Dors on Diana Dors. And you got a lot of you still have quite sort of a bit of enduring sort of contact from people about this.
Oh, yeah, people are still buying it. Yeah. Well, Diana Dors was so well known in these parts. What really amazed me is that everybody over a certain age knows about Diana Dors and has some connection with her, some personal connection. Either wrote her a letter or saw her drive by her.
What was it about her, do you think, that I mean, apart from the sort of like flamboyant good looks?
Yeah. Well, she was a really, really compassionate woman, and she had her own radio programs, and she was sort of an agony aunt as well.
Right.
And she answered every single letter that she got, and she was very, very warm, and you could just feel her affection and her warmth and her compassion. She was a lovely, lovely woman.
Yeah.
And when her son Jason, who lived downstairs, asked me to write a book about her, I was very reluctant because I didn't know anything about her coming from Canada, as I am. Also in Montreal, where I come from, we weren't allowed to see films until we were 15 years old. So I actually never saw a film.
You
about
weren't
her.
allowed to see films
No,
until you were...
no.
Sorry, was that in the law? You weren't legally allowed to watch films?
No, we were allowed to watch films. We weren't allowed to go to cinemas because there had been a fire in some cinema and some children got burnt. And after that, they just didn't allow children to go to cinema.
So this wasn't a censor. This wasn't, to censor. To restrict access to films.
No,
it was a public safety thing.
It was to keep us safe.
Yeah. That doesn't sound
now,
very
now
likely
we wear
to me.
masks, but then it was so anyway. I didn't really want to write a book about Diana Dors, but I started doing a bit of research about her, and I just was amazed that everybody knew her. Everybody seemed to know her and love her. She was really, really a very much loved woman, and I was so taken by it that I decided that I would write about her.
Do you think she sort of like ushered in a sort of like new generation of, how, for want of a better way of putting it, sort of sexually liberal women in public? Because she was known for having, for living the high life.
Yes, and she did live the high life, but she worked very, very hard. She had a lot of men to support.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a very hard worker and a very caring person,
Yeah.
And in writing the book, I really grew to love her.
Right. Well, I think it's only natural that in your latest book, Nomad Girl, there we go, there's you.
That's me.
Yeah.
Me standing in the desert.
That's not the beach at Broadstairs.
No.
That's in Morocco.
That's in Morocco.
Although obviously the beach in Broadstairs is very nice too, just
That's
before the
very
Thanet
nice, yeah.
tourist thingy gets onto us. And you actually talk about Diana Dors and Jason Dors Lake, her son, who lived in the flat below here, towards the end of the book, before then going full circle and talking about going back to Morocco.
Yeah, well, the book is a memoir.
Yes.
So I have all bits of my life in there. It's a sort of memoir. It's not exactly a memoir. So I have just glimpses of my life at different stages. And one of the very important stages was writing the book about Diana Dors and knowing Jason. After a lot of wandering about in the universe, I had to go back to Montreal and settle down for a bit because I had become pregnant.
Right.
And having a baby to me was something I'd never contemplated. I was still very young. And in the book I say it was more of something that I could understand was going to Mars. I could understand going to Mars, but I couldn't understand having a baby.
Right.
I never wanted a baby because, to me, a baby seemed, old. When you're old, you have babies. I wanted to be young all the time.
And also,
I never wanted to grow up. I still don't.
Yeah,
I still haven't.
Well, no, you haven't. Don't we know it? And also, being young, you don't have any of those responsibilities and all of that sort of business.
That's right.
So it became...
So what happened is, when I became pregnant, I was on kind of a world tour, hitchhiking around the world. And I had to go back. I had to have somewhere to have the baby. I mean, I waited till quite late. I was about in my 8th month. And then suddenly realized, yeah, I am going to have this baby. It's not going to go away. At the beginning, I thought, well, if I continue hitchhiking around, and maybe the baby will go away. But it didn't. So I had to go back to Montreal to have the baby because I didn't know where else to go.
Right.
And when I came back to Montreal, I was really devastated because my trip around the world had been cut off.
Where had you gone back to Montreal from? You were in Africa, weren't you?
Yeah, we hitchhiked. I had met my husband to be in Israel, and I really wanted, my plan was to just keep on hitchhiking, just to get to know the world.
Yeah.
And when we would stop in places, I thought we'd earn some money and then just keep going. He was from Africa. So we started off by going, and I always wanted to go to Africa. I wanted to go to East Africa.
He came from South Africa, didn't he, if I remember?
He came from South Africa, yeah. And I was fascinated by names like Mozambique and, the Karoo. And I just wanted to see what they were like. I mean, places with such names.
Yes.
They must be just wonderful places.
Timbuktu.
Yeah, that was in Morocco.
Yes.
Off Morocco, south of Morocco. So I was hitchhiking and became pregnant, had to go back to Montreal to have the baby, and was really, really upset about it because, here was my plan and it was going so well and everything, and now I had to go and have the baby and then couldn't continue. But what happened was that my husband was a musician, and for some, I don't know how exactly it happened. I explain it in the book. We opened a club called the Finjan. And the Finjan was very interesting. It was the 60s club, when all those things were just happening. And musicians who weren't famous then, and some of them later became very famous, were willing to play the small clubs. There's sort of blues, folk music, and because they would get experience in playing and just hone their skills. And so we got the club called the Finjan. We managed to get it and set it up. And Shimon, my husband, was also an artist. He was a musician and an artist. And he set it up very beautifully. He made it really, really lovely. It was kind of sort of with a Moroccan flavor. The Finjan is an Arabic coffee pot, and people gather around it to sing songs and tell stories. And we called it the Finjan. And every week we had a different musician. And for me, that was a little bit like hitchhiking, and every time going into another country. Every musician was another country for me. And the musicians stayed with us because hotels were very expensive in the area we lived in. So my duty, one of my duties with Finjan, was to take care of the musicians. And for me, each musician was like entering another country, and became sort of my substitute for traveling. And in a way it was interesting because I didn't have to go out to get the adventure.
Yes.
Because I was really into adventure, traveling and adventure. But now the adventure came to me. And every week I had a new adventure. And it was very interesting, especially since some of the musicians like Bob Dylan and John Lee Hooker became really, really famous.
Yeah.
And I knew them before they were famous. And some of them, because they stayed with me, and because I got to know them, and we became friends. Some of them became really lifelong friends. I still have them as friends. And
It's really difficult to see how that sort of interaction could possibly happen today, because you have sort of like social media saturation everywhere, and these musicians were not known really, apart from a small sort of band of adoring fans. They were known sort of in the areas they came from, but as you say, they were still still to become famous.
Right.
And so you had the space in order to have these adventures. The club became popular, but it wasn't as if your sort of like personal lives or your lives with with these musicians sort of like came under the same spotlight then.
No.
Is that,
no.
and that allowed it all of the the action to happen.
That's right. That's right. It was much more easy and gentle and flowing, kind of. It wasn't, sort of stark.
Yes.
Stark kind of relationships in the celebrity category, because they weren't celebrities. None of them were celebrities at the time, and I really related to them because it was the '60s, and they were just the trend in music was just beginning, where musicians were writing their own songs.
Yes.
And their songs spoke about them and their feelings and their loves and their wants, their desires,
and their losses.
What?
And their losses.
And their losses, and a lot of it was quite political, because the '60s was a very political time. I say in the book, it's the era that changed the world in a way. And
yes.
It did. And so, where was I?
So anyway, yes.
So I wanted to write about this. I wanted to write about the Finjan, and I wanted to write about, in retrospect, some of the musicians like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan and John Lee Hooker became really, really famous, and I knew them when,
Yes.
And I wanted to write about them, and I wanted to write about that whole trend in music, and give a picture of the kind of people they were, because a lot of them were really exceptional people. They were very interested in humanity, in being good people, in having good things happen. Were anti-war and stuff like that.
Yes, because the Vietnam War was
That's
top
right.
Yes,
yeah.
big thing at the
and
time.
one of the
obviously.
musicians who became a really good friend of mine was Jesse Winchester, and he was escaping from the Vietnam War into Canada.
Right.
Because Canada was accepting people who were didn't want to go to war.
Conscientious objectors.
Yeah, they were conscientious objectors, and Canada took them in, which was very brave of Canada to do that, because very dependent on USA. Canada and USA are very close in many, many ways. And for Canada to stand up to USA and say, we're going to take in these people, you're not going to put them in prison or something. And anyway, I wanted to write about this. And I wanted to write about my experiences with them and my feelings about them. I wanted to write about their music. I wanted to write about the coffee houses. I wanted to write about that whole '60s era, which was very different. And this is like quite recently. But I didn't have enough material to fill a book, there was a lot of material, but I had to choose material that people would be interested in. A lot of things I was interested in, but I didn't think, I could write about it for everyone to be interested in.
Yeah.
So I had a problem. I wanted to write about it, but I didn't have enough to fill a book. And then I went to, my daughter lives in Santa Barbara, and I was visiting her in Santa Barbara and discovered that Jack Canfield was giving a seminar on writing, and Jack Canfield is the one who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and he sold more books, more non-fiction books than anyone ever, and I always admired him. He just knew everybody in the media world, and so it was going to be a small seminar, just about 12 people, and it was going to be held in his house. And I thought, wow, I just have to go. And maybe he'll give me some idea of how to progress on this book that I wanted to write, but didn't have enough material. So that's what happened. I went to the seminar, and it was really amazing seminar. And that's when he introduced me by saying, "Oh, I'd like you to meet Niema Ash. She's one of the most interesting people I've ever met." And I was just astounded when he said that, because I couldn't believe that I was one of the most interesting people he ever met. He just knew everybody in the media world, And but he suggested to me, he said, "Why don't you write a memoir about your experiences?" He says, "You've met the Dalai Lama. You even had dinner with him. You have a photograph with him. You've met all these interesting people. Why don't you write a memoir?" And I thought, well, if Jack Canfield thinks I'm that interesting, maybe other people will as well. It doesn't matter what I think.
Well, it certainly is an interesting journey you go through, and your perspective. I mean, you're obviously not an ordinary person. I mean, some of us here might say, that doesn't. Yeah, there's quite a few people like flesh and blood, but it doesn't therefore mean they're normal.
Did you mean I'm not a normal person?
But yeah, so I mean, it's certainly a very unusual journey that you take. I mean, having people like Bob Dylan and what's his name, John Lee Hooker, in your kitchen, and sort of like meeting them at the early part of their career. Although John Lee Hooker was a little bit better known, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a bit better known.
Yeah.
Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee.
Oh right.
Yeah. Yeah, they were, that was interesting because these were musicians who later the Beatles and the Stones all worked through.
Yes.
I gave them inspiration, gave them, and I had the opportunity of getting to know them personally.
Did you feel as if you were sort of like in the forefront of sort of a new sort of like social and musical movement? Did it feel like...
No.
It didn't?
No, it didn't, because don't forget, these people weren't well known. They were just like guys from around the corner, even though they were from different countries or whatever. It felt more friendly and more casual.
Okay.
Than that.
Although Bob Dylan might not think so. He didn't get much of a reception, did he?
No, that's true. Yeah, that's true. You see that. Yeah, when he sang at the Finjan, he was one of the only people, probably the only person we had that people walked out on.
Right.
They just didn't like the sound of his voice, and he wasn't very professional at all. It was, he hadn't been playing many clubs before that.
Right.
And he got on the stage and he was kind of fiddling with the strings and not getting the right key and just, and mumbling to himself. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that really got me started writing the book as well is that one of our friends, the night that Bob Dylan played at the Finjan, somebody recorded him. And years later, and that's how the book begins, years later, my daughter calls me up and she says, you know what, there's a CD out called Bob Dylan at the Finjan.
Right,
and,
yes.
And this was many years later. I was already living in Broadstairs. I had lived in London and came to Broadstairs. And in that CD, and I got a copy of it right away, of course, and in that CD, you could hear him fiddling with the Finjan and saying, oh, damn, the strings or whatever. And at one point he says, everyone's gone now, because everybody walked out on him. Everyone's gone now. He said, I think I'll just sing for you guys. And of course, for me, that was the best part, because there was just, people to serve as the waitress and myself and Shimon, and he sang for us. And
wow.
So we had a private concert.
Goodness.
Although, at the time, the significance wasn't the same as it would be now to get a private concert from Bob Dylan.
No. Although you then you were friends for quite a while as he became more established.
Yes, we were friends, because I became friends with quite a few of the musicians because they would come back time after time. Although he didn't come back because Shimon didn't want to hire him again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What?
He says, that must be the mother of all regrets.
Oh, God.
Yeah, he didn't want to hire him because people walked down on him, so they weren't going to come see him again.
I know, but he was successful by that time. He'd
No,
got
he
himself.
not when he sang at the Finjani.
Oh no, but after that, when
Oh yeah, after that. But during the Finjan days, he wanted another gig, and Chimon said no, he wouldn't do it because the audience didn't like him. Yeah.
Right, and of course there were other enduring friendships, such as with Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, well, with
What
Leonard,
bizarre beginnings that friendship was launched with, or launched by.
Leonard. I went to university, and I used to read a lot, and I loved poetry, And one of my favorite poets was someone called Irving Layton, Canadian poet called Irving Layton. And I read all his poems and his books, and I just love it. And then it turned out he was teaching at the university that I was going to. So I took all his courses. I had intended to study psychology, but I ended up studying English literature because I took all his courses, and they were all in English literature. Anyway, for me, he was like big hero. And then one day, I was walking somewhere around my home, and he was walking on the same street, coming from the opposite direction. And I thought, wow, that's Irving Layton walking right on the street. And so I had to say something. It took me a while, to get up my courage. And I didn't want to say something casual like, I really like your lectures, but I ended up saying exactly that. I said, Mr. Layton, I'm one of your students, and I really love your lectures, and I've taken all the courses that you give. And then he says, do you live around? And I said, what are you doing around here, And he says he teaches at a college that was quite close by. And he says, he's so glad to hear me say that, because he says the kids he teaches at the college, he says they can't wait for the end of the lesson. He says none of them are interested in poetry. It's kind of enforced on them.
Yes.
And he asked me where I live, and I said, oh, just up the street. And very brazenly, either I'm shy or I'm brazen, there's no in between. And very brazenly I said, would you like to come for coffee? And he said, that would be very nice. So he came for coffee. And then he used to teach on Wednesday. Every Wednesday he would come for coffee. Now Irving was Leonard's guru. And Leonard's, I think one of his first albums, not the first one, was dedicated to Irving.
Right.
And Irving's, a lot of his poems and his books were dedicated to Leonard. They were very, very close friends. Irving was very much into helping younger poets, and Leonard was a poet to begin with. And I met Leonard through Irving. And then we became friends, and Leonard used to come to Montreal, no matter where he was. Even when he became famous, he used to come to Montreal for New Year's, Christmas and New Year's, for holiday times. And we always got together, and, well, it's all in the book. You have to read about it in the book.
Yes.
How that friendship began. And, and that friendship stayed for a long time.
Yes.
Until his death, actually. Because, we had a really close relationship with Irving and Irving's wife, Aviva, who became a really close friend of mine, and Leonard.
Very special times.
Very special times. Very special times. And it was really interesting to relive them by writing about them.
Yes. So so how did Tibet happen then?
How did Tibet happen? Well, after a while, I continued my adventures and traveled a lot. And I happened to be in China.
As one does.
As one is. And when the doors to Tibet were open, because you could never go to Tibet. Tibet was a forbidden kingdom. And they never allowed tourists, visitors. And suddenly, China, who now controls Tibet, controlled it then, opened the door just for a while. And they allowed visitors. And myself and my then partner were among the first people to go to Tibet. But
Sure.
they saw Tibet as a very good tourist attraction because nobody could go to Tibet.
Right.
I mean, we were just among the first travelers that went to Tibet. And by the way, I got interested in Tibet through Leonard.
Oh,
Leonard
okay.
Cohen. Yeah, he taught us one of the Tibetan mantras, and we used to say this mantra, when we got together for New Year's festivals or whatever. We used to just all say Om Mani Padme Hum. So he got me interested in, and once
Yes.
I got interested in Tibet, I started reading a lot about it, and my favorite picture was the Potala Palace, where the Dalai Lamas lived, and I never thought I would be able to go to Tibet because Tibet was closed, and then when we were in China and opened up, I decided that's it, we've got to go to Tibet right away.
I mean, it's funny because it sounded like sort of like on a day-to-day level, it was actually very gritty. But then you also had the sort of like the spiritual side of sort of like Tibetan life,
Yeah,
exemplified by the sky burial, which is something I've the likes of which I've never read before. It's actually quite a difficult piece to read.
yeah. It was a difficult time. It was a difficult thing to see.
But that was an
To be part of.
amazing sort of opportunity to actually go to experience that and be able to write about it.
Yeah, well, we were really, really lucky because when we went to Tibet, being among the first travelers to go there, China made an edict with us that, you weren't allowed to leave Lhasa, the main city. But of course, travelers always do what they're not supposed to do. And we managed to get a jeep and travel all over Tibet, which is, you can't do that anymore. And as a matter of fact, shortly after we left Tibet, they stopped allowing visitors to see all the things that we saw. And you can't see the sky burial anymore. They don't
Right.
allow you to go to the sky burial.
Do they even allow the sky burials to take place?
Yeah, the sky burials take place still.
Right.
But it's strictly Tibetan ceremony. No foreigners are allowed.
Right.
So we were really lucky because there was a very brief period, just right at the beginning, where they didn't realize that travelers would just do all these things and go all these places where they weren't supposed to go, and then they made it official that you can't go to different places that we went to that I write about, and writing about the sky burial, I don't think anyone's ever written about it before because very few people have ever seen it.
And it also, I mean, it was, from my point of view, it would have been a completely life-changing experience.
It was, yeah.
And you had to, I mean, and you sort of talked with, some of your Tibetan guides and sort of contacts about it for a good few days afterwards.
That's
you
right.
tried to make sense of what you'd
That's
seen.
right, yeah, that's right. And and I was really lucky to meet someone in Tibet who spoke English, and who was just visiting Tibet. He was actually living in India with his parents because they had left. A lot of Tibetans left when the Chinese took over.
Yeah.
But he spoke English really, really well and explained a lot to me and made me understand a lot because, the scar burial was a very, very hard thing to
Yes.
to come to terms with.
And also meeting up with the Dalai Lama, even though the photographer actually missed quite a lot of it, or most of it, I mean, that must be sort of like really vividly caught in your imagination as well. Not everyone gets to sort of like you had tea with the Dalai Lama, didn't you? Dinner. It wasn't sort of
A usual occurrence.
it wasn't sort of chicken sandwiches and and scones.
No,
was it?
what happened? What happened is that when I published my book, Touching Tibet, it was first called Flight of the Wind Horse.
Yes.
The original book was called Flight of the Wind Horse. The publishers asked me if I would write to the Dalai Lama and ask him to write a foreword. And I said, no, I can't do that. The Dalai Lama, he's not going to write a foreword to my book. And they were quite insistent. And in the end, there was someone in London, and I was living in London at the time, who was the Dalai Lama's envoy, sort of, in London. And I went to see her. Her name was Madame Takla. And I told her that my publishers wanted me to ask for the Dalai Lama to write a foreword to the book. And she says, well, sure. She says, give me the book. Give me the manuscript. It was in manuscript form then. And let me look at it. And if I like it, I'll send it to the Dalai Lama, and he'll look at it. And maybe he'll write a foreword for you. And sure enough, he did. He wrote a foreword to the book. And I was really touched, because that was the year that he won the Nobel Prize.
Right.
And he was just all over the world. He had so many engagements and so many things he had to do. And among all that, he wrote a foreword to the book. So then in Toronto, when I met him in Toronto, and that was a very unique experience. I write about it in the book, so I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
It was a really unique experience. But that was one of the reasons that he met me, is because I wrote the book, and he wrote a foreword to the book.
Right.
And he was really, really pleased that I wrote the book about Tibet, And anyway, when you read the book, you read the chapters on Tibet, and you'll see.
Okay. Now, there are chapters on, where you cover a couple of other things, like, your knowledge of the Bee Gees and whatever. But I mean, the next sort of like big section is about Diana Dors and Jason having moved to London and then moved to Broadstairs eventually from London.
Yeah, right.
So, separate from the book, what on earth brought you to Broadstairs? Beautiful place though it is. I mean, but it's like it is. I mean, in those days in particular, it was quite a backwater. Transport links.
Yeah, it's about
with Thanet and the mainland.
I think I'm here about 8 years, maybe 10 years. I just don't even remember anymore.
Okay.
What happened was I was married at the time, and my husband was in construction, and every time he wanted a holiday, Broadstairs was the nearest place for us to come to, the nearest nice place for us to come to that had a beach.
Right.
And we'd walk along the beach sometimes, and we look at this house called Eagle House that's right on the beach. And it's very, very, very unusual to have a house right on the sand.
Yes.
And we always thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have it? And it had nice balconies. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a flat, in an Eagle House? And my husband was in property at the time. And so he was always looking, in all the agents' windows. And sure enough, one time he saw that there was a flat in Eagle House available, which is very rare. It hardly become available.
Yes.
And he thought, I've got to get it. And sure enough, we got it. And that was one flat. And then eventually there was this other flat, the one that I'm living in now, that you looked down upon it and had a big garden. And he really wanted that flat because he was a gardener.
Right.
And then the flat actually became available. But you had to buy 2 other flats.
Right. Right, okay.
The person selling it owned 3, and he wanted to sell all 3.
Yes.
So we put ourselves in serious hawk, and bought them. And so we ended up with 4 flats here.
Right.
Now, of course, that I'm separated.
Yes.
My husband sold the other flats, and I just have this one.
Yeah. But you don't. But I mean, this is an amazing place to live.
It is an amazing place, and it's an amazing flat, and it has a beautiful garden, really
Yes.
big garden, and it has also a public garden, communal garden for everyone. But I have my own private garden,
Indeed.
which is lovely.
That includes Slacker's Corner.
Yeah, there's a little corner we call Slacker's Corner, and that's where I wrote most of my book about Diana Dors.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and bizarrely, Jason was down. Well, okay. So Jason ended up here as well.
Well, he ended up here because I knew this guy called David Mallon, who was a friend. I had met him because I was a friend of the Bee Gees, and he knew the Bee Gees, and the Bee Gees always had a party every New Year's, a sort of a hogmanay. It was based on the Scottish New Year's, where a dark stranger brings in a lump of coal to begin the year. And this guy, David, he was a dark stranger. at the Bee Gees party. The Bee Gees had an amazing party every year. It was absolutely amazing. You know,
Right.
everybody was there.
Okay.
Including some of the Beatles, and there were amazing parties every New Year. And I met David there because he was the man who brought in the lump of coal. And we became friends. He lived in London as well. And then somehow he disappeared out of my life. And one day, when I was already living in Broadstairs, I was walking along the beach, and coming towards me was David. He actually lived right in a little town called Ramsgate, right near Broadstairs. And so this is where he disappeared to. And I found him. And he happened to be a very good friend of Diana Dors.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, he was called the Candy Man because he used to supply the drugs.
Yes, he was obviously a very busy man.
A very busy man. And when Diana Dors died, and then Jason's
Yes.
father committed suicide,
Yes.
shot himself, and then Jason was sent to the States with a brother who wasn't much older than him, who was in the States, and he had power of attorney, and the whole thing was quite a disaster. But when he came back to England at the age of 18, his brother kicked him out of California and sent him back to England. He looked up David, and he was looking for a place to live, and he really wanted, his dream was to live by the beach.
Yes.
And we had one of the flats we had was a flat under us by the beach. So David said, I know exactly the person for your flat. And he introduced us to Jason. And that's how I knew Jason. So kind of
and it was
a complicated story, but...
Yes, and it was him that encouraged you to write the book about Diana Dors.
Oh, yeah,
as we
no,
said
I
before.
didn't know anything about Diana Dors,
Yeah.
you know. And, and he said, you must write a book about my mother and my family because pretty soon I'm going to forget everything about them. You know, I won't remember things. Well, my memory is still fresh. I'd like you to write a book, and I'll fill you in with all the details. And that was the first time, actually, a book had been written. A lot of books have been written about her, but nothing so intimately, you know, from the inside out.
Yes. Yes, he was a very troubled personality, wasn't he, Jason?
Very troubled, very
Yeah,
interesting guy.
very interesting.
Unfortunately.
Yes, yes. It can be a burden being interesting, can't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, he just quite recently
He
died.
as well.
Yeah.
As did David Mallon as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
a while before him.
Right.
Another celebrated character in
Yeah,
Ramsgate.
yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then the book comes full circle. We've not really talked about Morocco, but it begins and ends with Morocco.
Not exactly begins, but
Well,
pretty
it's sort
close to beginning.
Yes, it is right near the beginning
Yeah.
of the main part of the story, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
What is it that, because you sort of rediscovered Morocco a few years ago and have been sort of like going there every year since.
Right, yeah.
What is it about those sort of bleak yellow spaces that attracts you so?
I just fell in love with the dunes, with the Moroccan dunes.
Mm.
Yeah, they have some of the highest dunes in Africa was in Morocco. And the first time I went to the dunes, I was actually stunned, you know, just stunned. But it's an experience that, you know, you can't kind of reproduce. You have to live it. And I can't remember who said, one of the famous writers said that anybody who's been in the dunes and stayed in the dunes comes out a different person. And that's
Yes.
really, really true. Something
Yeah.
happens. It's very, very hard to explain, you know. And I became just fascinated by that silence and by the space and by that connection with the universe. you
Yeah.
know. It's an amazing thing. And I remember one of the last times I was there, because you can't stay in the dunes anymore. It seems wherever I go afterwards, you can't stay there anymore. you can't see it anymore.
I thought you could stay in the dunes. I
No,
thought,
no more. They don't let you stay in the dunes. They have camps now that are the base of the dunes, but you can't go up into them.
Okay.
No, because there was too many people happening, and the dunes were just, you know, becoming ruined by
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I stayed there, and the stars were under us. What an experience is that, to see stars under you?
Really?
I don't know how it happens. So it has to be how it happens.
Because I don't think you get that silence anywhere else.
No, you can't. You can't get it anywhere else. You just, there's always some electricity noise, some buzz, some something. There's absolute silence. You just never experience anything like that.
Yeah.
And I was just fascinated. And of course, I met Nomad Boy.
Indeed, you did.
And that's something else.
And you're and you're still in contact with him as well, aren't you?
Yeah. Still in contact with him.
And you have a love of Moroccan culture as well.
I love Morocco. Morocco is kind of my sensuous home, and Tibet was my spiritual home.
Oh, right.
It's a very sensuous country. And first of all, I love the sunshine. I love the heat. And you don't get that much in winter.
No.
In London.
Certainly not in Broadstairs, anyway, yeah.
And it was just so wonderful just to be able to... I like just putting on one garment, nothing else, and you could do that in Moroccan winter. So
right.
I tend to spend a lot of the winters in Morocco and travel a lot.
Yes.
And I travel quite a lot with my friend Irina. She's in the first chapter of the book. And actually it's one of the times that we were in Morocco, she's with us. And we were in the Blue City last time I was there. And it's just amazing. The Blue City is an amazing place. Yes. Morocco is an amazing place. It's just... Yes. I couldn't believe it at the beginning. I mean, one of the reasons I stayed in England, because I came here to finish a PhD, go to university. I got a Canada Council award, because otherwise I couldn't have done it,
Yeah.
To do it. And one of the reasons I stayed on is because it was so easy to travel to totally different places. Like in Canada, you could travel and travel and travel and travel, and
you'd
you're
still be in the same place.
Yes, in the same place.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not even the accents are very much different. I mean, in the USA, the accents are very different from north, south, to east, to west. People speak with a different accent.
Yes.
But in Canada, it's pretty much the same.
It's uniform.
Yeah, pretty much. Everything is pretty much uniform. And so when I came to England, and in 2 hours I could be in some exotic place that was totally different, back in the Bible. I mean, I was just amazed. I said, I'm not leaving here.
So it sort of it facilitated your desire just to travel all the time.
Yeah. To travel. I love traveling. I love going to different countries. But now I'm kind of stuck in Morocco. I just love going to Morocco.
Are you doing Morocco again?
Yeah, this winter.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I've got to do it.
Yeah.
It's my home now.
It's a calling. Yes, it is. Yes, you've got so many different homes. Although you can't go to Tibet, so that's one home you can't go to.
No.
But, well, anyway, so I mean, are you? Were you? Does the book bring sort of like a sense of either closure or satisfaction to to all of these?
It does. Yeah, it was a hard book to write because there was so much I had to leave out.
Yes, I mean all the stuff about the Yeats poetry and the dance.
That's right. Yeah, and doing performances, doing Yeats plays.
Yes,
we did in London as well. Yeah, there was that whole era, that whole episode, and so there was a lot of things in my life, that happened.
Yes,
because I just seek out adventure. I have to have adventure.
It's funny because
I live it. I eat it.
Your strapline is, was it an ordinary woman having extraordinary experiences? But you're not ordinary, really, are you?
I'm pretty ordinary.
Do you reckon?
I reckon.
Who's told you that? Anyway. Yeah, we won't go there.
I don't have to be told. I just know.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's a very interesting read. And I strongly recommend it. Thank you very much for talking to me about it.
Thank you for talking to me.